There never has been a better time to be an introverted artist than today. The 21st century business models are almost designed for introverts. It's simply too good to be true. And so in this video we will talk about ways to sell your art online as an introvert. A couple of years back I was homeless, had to go back to living with my mom. I was jobless and I just came from some very traumatic experience. I was working 12 hours a day, 7 days 7, which is about 372 hours per month. And if I counted everything up, I was making a couple of euro an hour at best, and so far below minimum wage. And so it was clear to me that my art business was not really working out, and so I had to do something. And I decided to take a job at Leenbakker, which is some kind of smaller version of IKEA in Belgium, and I had to be there at 10 a.m. in the morning. And so what my workaholic brain would do is I would get up at 4 a.m, work 6 hours on my art business, and then go to my lesser important job at 10 a.m. and work the rest of the day. Now what happened during that time, and this is very common for introverted artists, is that every time somebody would ask me what I did for a living, I would start to become ashamed of the answer, because I didn't want to say that I worked at Leenbakker, because that's a failure position in life. And I also didn't have the guts to tell them that I was an artist, because I wasn't a real artist. I wasn't making a living from my art practice. And this is a very big problem for introverted artists. They are way too self-aware, constantly self-analyzing, and as a result they feel unworthy of calling themselves an artist for the simple fact that they don't make a living from their practice. And this idea that you cannot call yourself an artist because you don't make a living from your practice is of course complete BS. Number one, it's absolutely normal to do a regular job and then after hours do your art job. Number two, it's absolutely okay to call yourself an artist long before you make a living from that practice, because let's face it, the reality is that you are going to grind for 10 years before anything real is going to happen. And number three, you have to enjoy the hustle and the grind. Looking back at those times, I'm actually very proud of what I was doing. I was getting up at 4, working 6 hours, then going to Leenbakker, don't work a whole full day. I was a workaholic, grinding it all the way. But during that time, I was full of shame. I was full of shame of the position that I was in and the failure that I was experiencing. And this cannot be normal. This cannot be the norm. Yet all introverted artists are feeling that way and are kind of struggling with these feelings. And so the first message that I have for artists, for introverted artists, that it's absolutely fine to do a regular job. This is part of what it means to be an artist. This is part of the package of the art journey. And introverted artists with self-esteem issues have to be aware of the fact that they can call themselves artists regardless of the money that they make from that. Because if you don't have the guts to call yourself an artist, then you reduce your chances of selling art by a lot.
I learned to love that look, and I can read your sighs.
One of the things that comes up a lot, and one of the things that was voted highest in a poll that I recently made, is that artists are waiting until they're good enough to promote their art. They're waiting until they're good enough to start selling their art. And this is especially true for introverted artists, because introverted artists are afraid of talking to the girl at the bar. They are afraid of opening a conversation to a collector. They are afraid because they're constantly thinking, worried about what people think of them. Introverted artists rather wait until they're good enough, until they're certain that people will not critique the things that they do, or they're certain that the worst case scenarios in their head will not come true. Now here's the problem with this introverted mindset. Number one, you will be waiting for the rest of your life until you're good enough, because you will push the requirements for being good enough further and further and further. And number two, this mindset of waiting until you're good enough is a mindset that doesn't allow you to grow. It's an expression of trying to stay in your comfort zone, and nobody ever improved themselves, grew as a human being, grew as an artist by staying in their comfort zone. And so more often than not, after 5 years of waiting until you're good enough, you find yourself in the same spot as you started. You find yourself with the same skill level as you started. You don't improve by staying in your comfort zone. You have to start posting your art online. You have to start marketing. You have to start selling your art by posting your art on a website that you can use to sell your art. You don't have to be great in order to start, but you have to start in order to be great. Let me tell you a story about writing poetry. Back in the days before girls me up. I was actually a pretty romantic guy, or at least I wanted to be a romantic guy. And so I wanted to write poetry and be that personality type. And so I started doing that. And after a couple of weeks, I obviously sucked at it, because that's what you get after a couple of weeks. But because an instructor during a workshop encouraged me to participate in a competition, and I really like to compete, I just went and competed in a national poetry competition, and against all expectations I won the first prize. Not the first main prize, but the first youth prize, which is a prize for people under the age of 28 or something. And it was a prize of $500 together with some other stuff, and the poem was about like 5 sentences long, and so that's about $100 per sentence that I got there. Now, what's the moral of this story? I had every reason to believe that I wasn't good enough. I was only doing it for a couple of weeks, and so if I had listened to that inner voice telling me that I wasn't good enough, then I would have never participated in that competition and never won that prize. And so the moral of the story is that introverts have to stop being their own worst enemy and stop talking themselves down so much. They have to let the marketplace decide whether their art is good enough or not, instead of deciding that themselves. And when you do that, you might be surprised of how easy it actually is to win art competitions. Sometimes you only need a couple of months to develop a skill that has monetary value. You don't need 10 years of experience to make money from your art. You don't need to be as good as Picasso before you can start making money from your art. You don't have to be great in order to start, but you have to start in order to be great. And this tendency to be your own worst enemy has many forms. Introverts oftentimes think that they're not good salespeople because they saw some movie with a main character that is a salesperson that happens to be an extrovert. And because of that movie, they now think that they don't have the skills to sell. When in reality, the best salespeople are introverted or at least ambiverted. They have both. They have some extroversion and some introversion. And the reality of the situation is that a lot of those introverted skill sets that come so natural to you are actually extremely powerful sales skill set. For example, introverts tend to not talk a lot. They tend to listen a lot to the other person, and that results in them being able to understand the other person way better. And you might be surprised, but in the best sales conversations, the customer is doing 80% of the talking. The salesperson is doing 20%, is listening to understand those pain points, because if you understand the pain points, you can solve those pain points, aka you can sell a product or service, whatever you want to sell. Whoever understands the customer best wins the game. That's the game that you're playing, and introverts are very good at that. But if you are your own worst enemy and constantly telling yourself that you're not good enough, that you're waiting until you're good enough, you can never use those natural skill sets. And when it comes to solving those pain points, you don't have to make it too complex. You don't have to invent a cure for cancer. No, it can be very easy. A problem can be as simple as somebody wants to find a gift for a wedding that they have to go to. And so your art can solve that problem. Your art can be the ideal solution for their problem at that moment. Somebody else might want to find some piece of art that looks very modern, very cool, to make their interior look a little bit more expensive. And your minimalistic art piece can solve that problem. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Life can also be ridiculously easy.
But they will never get us. We're running fast as lightning.
The most amazing conversationalists that I know, that I have the best conversations with, are all introverts or ambiverts. I've never had a great conversation with an extrovert. They don't listen, they constantly talk about themselves, and more importantly, they usually don't have anything to say. And so if introverts are the best talkers, then why aren't they talking to everyone? Well, the reality is that introverts don't have a problem with talking, they have a problem with starting. They cannot start a conversation. And back in the days, in the 19th century or the 20th century, that would have been a huge problem, because that was the only way. You had to be able to start a conversation. But in the 21st century, that is not the best way. That is not necessary. You don't have to be a networking genius in order to be the best networker alive. I'm very much an introvert myself. If I go to an art gallery, I will be standing there fantasizing about how I would talk to people. I'm not actually talking to people. Now, in my situation, that is absolutely not necessary. With a small YouTube channel of 16,000 subscribers, I get around 20 messages a day of people with sponsorship requests, artists, galleries, collectors. And so that is the best networking tool that you can hope for. Having a small YouTube channel will generate you more connections than being the best networker alive. That's the reality of the world that we live in today. And as introverts, you have the ideal set of skill sets to completely ace social media. Number one, you are a great listener, meaning that you will be able to understand the audience way better than an extrovert. And if you understand the audience way better, then you can provide what they need way better. On top of that, you will also actually like that. You will like to analyze those things. You will like to analyze comment sections. You will like to analyze the avatar, the audience that you're serving at that moment. And on top of that, social media is a very lonely game. You will have to make videos, you will have to make posts, you will be doing what an introverted artist does best, which is alone in the studio creating things. Extroverts can't do that. They need people around them. Introverts can. The best YouTubers alive at this moment are introverts. And the best part of it is that you don't even have to show your face. You can have a faceless channel which generates more mysteriousness, which will help developing your brand even more. Look at Banksy, for example, one of the biggest artists of this century, and nobody knows who he is. Nobody has seen his face. That is possible in the 21st century and would not be possible in the 19th century. In the 19th century, this no face type of personality, it wouldn't work. And so as an introvert, you have to be aware of that potential that is currently present in the world in the 21st century and understand that there never has been a better time to be alive as an introvert. Now, this video so far had a lot of motivational elements because that's what I think introverts actually need. According to my polls, according to my research, most of them didn't even started selling their art. They didn't even started promoting their art. And so this motivation, inspiration type of thing is what gets you over that first step, over that first hurdle. But if you need more practical advice, I have videos where I lay out the step-by-step exact process to sell your art online. I've put them in a playlist and I'll link it in the description and in the end screen. That said, get the hell out of here.